Dr. Nathan Briggs slammed Ellie Cole's medical file onto the table so hard the pen cup shattered. "This child is done," he said. "Sign it." Captain Marcus Cole, a Navy SEAL commander who had never lost a man in combat, stood 3 feet away and didn't move. His 9-year-old daughter sat in a wheelchair behind him, fingers trembling, watching a doctor decide her future with the same fury most men save for enemies. 18 specialists had already written the word permanent. Briggs wanted to be the last. Then a rookie nurse with 6 weeks on the job stepped into the doorway and said 5 words that made Briggs turn white. If you want to know what she said, subscribe now, follow this story to the very end, and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see just how far this story reaches. Captain Marcus Cole heard the word disabled for the first time when Ellie was 11 days old. A pediatric neurologist at Bethesda Naval Hospital held up a scan, pointed to a cluster of shadows near the base of Ellie's brain, and said, "This area controls voluntary motor function. What we're seeing here is consistent with congenital impairment. It's unlikely she'll develop normal use of her lower extremities." Marcus was 26 years old. He had just completed his second deployment. He had carried a wounded teammate across 400 meters of open ground under fire without stopping. But when that doctor said unlikely, his knees almost gave out. Rachel, his wife, was still in the recovery room. She didn't hear it first. Marcus did. And he made a decision in that moment, the kind SEALs make in the dark, fast and final, that he would be the one to carry this. He would absorb the blow so Rachel wouldn't have to take it alone. "What do we do?" he asked. The doctor folded his hands. "We wait. We observe. We manage expectations." Marcus stared at him. "That's not a plan. That's surrender." The doctor blinked. "Captain, I understand this is difficult. Don't tell me what you understand," Marcus said quietly. "Tell me what you're going to do for my daughter." They did everything. Over the next 9 years, Marcus and Rachel took Ellie to every specialist the military medical system could provide, and several it couldn't. Johns Hopkins, the Mayo Clinic, a private neurologist in Boston who charged $400 an hour and spoke with such confidence that Rachel cried in the car afterward, not from hope, but because confidence without results is the cruelest kind of medicine. 17 doctors examined Ellie between the ages of 1 and 9. Every single one arrived at the same conclusion. The language varied: non-progressive motor deficit, congenital neuromotor impairment, permanent bilateral lower extremity involvement, but the meaning never changed. Your daughter will not walk. Stop hoping. By the time Ellie turned 7, Rachel stopped going to the appointments. Not because she gave up, because her body couldn't take it anymore. The hope and crash cycle had worn a groove so deep inside her chest that each new consultation felt like falling into the same hole with no bottom. "I can't sit in another room and hear another man in a white coat tell me my baby is broken," she told Marcus one night, her voice flat and hollow. "I just can't." Marcus held her. "Then I'll go." Every time, and he did. Every appointment, every evaluation, every scan. Marcus sat in those rooms with his back straight and his hands still, absorbing verdicts the way he'd been trained to absorb gunfire, without visible reaction, without complaint, without breaking. But he was breaking. Slowly, quietly, in places no one could see. Ellie knew. Children always know more than adults think. She knew her father came home from her appointments with a jaw so tight she could see the muscles working beneath his skin. She knew her mother cried in the shower when she thought no one was listening. She knew the word disabled followed her like a shadow, into classrooms, onto playgrounds, through every doorway of every building that had a ramp instead of stairs. She also knew something else, something she had never told anyone because she didn't have the words for it yet, and because every time she tried, adults talked over her. Her legs weren't empty. They weren't dead. They were something else entirely, something she could feel but not explain, like a radio signal just barely out of range. But no one ever asked her what she felt. They asked machines. They asked scans. They asked each other. They never asked her. The 18th doctor was at Walter Reed. His name was Dr. Nathan Briggs, chief of the neurology department, 20 years of service, a reputation built on precision and certainty. He was the kind of man who spoke in conclusions, not possibilities. Marcus had requested the evaluation himself, one last time, not because he expected anything different, but because a SEAL commander doesn't stop until every option is exhausted, even the options that feel like torture. It was a Tuesday in late October. Marcus arrived at Walter Reed at 6:30, uniform pressed, posture perfect. Rachel had kissed Ellie's forehead at the door of their base housing and then turned away quickly so Ellie wouldn't see her face. "Bring her home safe," Rachel whispered. Marcus nodded. He didn't say what he was thinking. "I always bring her home. I just can't bring her home fixed." Ellie was quiet during the drive. She watched the trees blur past her window and didn't ask where they were going. She already knew. She could tell by the way her father gripped the steering wheel. Tight, controlled, the grip of a man preparing for impact. "Dad," she said. "Yeah, sweetheart. Are they going to say the same thing again?" Marcus glanced at her in the rearview mirror. 9 years old, brown hair pulled back, eyes too wise for her age, hands folded in her lap the way she always folded them before appointments. Neat, still, like she was trying to make herself as small and unnoticeable as possible. "I don't know," he said. "Yes, you do," Ellie replied. He didn't argue. She was right. Dr. Briggs reviewed the file for 40 minutes before he spoke. Marcus sat across from him, hands clasped behind his back. Ellie sat in her wheelchair near the window, feet barely touching the floor. Finally, Briggs closed the folder. "Captain Cole," he said, "I've reviewed everything. Imaging, motor response, reflex testing, the full history from 17 prior evaluations." He paused. "There's no indication that aggressive intervention would change outcomes." Marcus nodded once. "We recommend continued physical therapy to maintain comfort and range of motion," Briggs continued. "Long-term accommodations, counseling if needed." "If needed?" Marcus repeated. "Yes." Marcus looked at Ellie. She was staring at the floor, not because she couldn't lift her head, because she didn't want to watch. "So that's it," Marcus said, not a question. Briggs hesitated. "At this point, Captain, yes." The silence that followed was the loudest sound in the room. Marcus felt it in his chest, the familiar compression, the tightening, the thing he'd learned to swallow so many times it had become automatic. He stood, extended his hand, shook Briggs's hand firmly, and said, "Thank you for your time." Professional, controlled, finished. And then the door opened. Clara Whitfield wasn't supposed to be on the 4th floor that morning. She had been reassigned from the 2nd floor at the last minute. A staffing shortage, a stomach virus running through the nursing pool. The usual chaos of a major military hospital trying to do too much with too few people. She had grabbed her charts and moved without complaint because that was what rookie nurses did. They moved, they adjusted, they stayed invisible. 6 weeks on the job, that was all she had. 6 weeks of learning where the supply closets were, which doctors liked their coffee black, which hallways to avoid during shift changes, and one unspoken rule that everyone understood but no one said out loud. Don't question the specialists. Don't linger where you don't belong. Don't think your opinion matters. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Clara had followed every rule. She had been quiet, efficient, and forgettable. Exactly what survival required in a place like Walter Reed, where hierarchy wasn't just respected, it was worshipped. But Clara Whitfield was not what her badge said she was. Her badge said Nurse, Grade 1. Her hands said something else entirely. She was walking past room 412 with a stack of charts pressed to her chest when she felt it. Not a sound, not a call, not anything she could name or explain, just a pull. The same pull she'd felt in villages on the other side of the world, in rooms with dirt floors and no electricity, where bodies told stories that machines would never hear. She slowed. She glanced through the open doorway, and she saw Ellie Cole. Clara didn't enter the room immediately. She stood just outside the doorway and watched. She watched Ellie's breathing, shallow, guarded, the pattern of a child who had learned to hold herself still because stillness was safer than trying. She watched Ellie's fingers, pressing into her palm at irregular intervals, then releasing. Not random, rhythmic, purposeful. The kind of micro-movement that most clinicians would miss because they were looking at screens instead of skin. She watched the slight delay between a sound in the hallway and Ellie's reaction, the way her shoulders tensed first, then her hands, then her jaw. A cascade. Not the response of a body that couldn't feel, the response of a body that felt too much and had learned to lock it all down. Clara had seen this before. Not in hospitals, not in textbooks. In a clinic made of corrugated metal in rural KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa, where a healer named Tandi had taught her something that no American medical school would ever put in a curriculum. Sometimes the body doesn't break. Sometimes it hides. And it hides because every person around it, every doctor, every parent, every teacher, every test, has told it that movement means failure, and failure means pain, and pain means the people you love look at you with that expression. The one that says, "I'm sorry you are what you are." The body listens, the body learns, and the body shuts down. Not because it can't move, because it believes it shouldn't. Clara took one breath, then she stepped inside. "Excuse me," she said softly. Every head turned. Briggs frowned. "Yes?" "I'm Nurse Clara, assigned to the floor today. I just wanted to check if Ellie needed water." A harmless sentence, a safe entry. Briggs waved dismissively. "That won't be necessary." Clara smiled politely. She didn't move. Marcus studied her. Young, blonde hair pulled tight, calm eyes. No hesitation in her posture. She didn't look nervous. Rookie nurses always looked nervous around officers. This one didn't. Ellie looked up at her. Their eyes met. Clara crouched slowly, bringing herself to Ellie's level, not towering, not looming, not looking down the way every adult in every hospital room had looked down at this child for 9 years. "Hi, Ellie," she said. "I'm Clara." Ellie blinked. "Hi." Her voice was clear, strong, stronger than anything in her file. Clara nodded once, as if confirming something only she had been listening for. Briggs cleared his throat. "Nurse, we're finishing up here." Clara stood. "Of course." She turned to leave. Then she stopped. "Captain Cole," she said, still respectful, still quiet. "Has anyone ever asked Ellie how her body feels right before she tries to move?" The room went dead silent. Briggs's expression hardened instantly. That's not how neurological assessment works. Clara didn't argue. She didn't explain. She simply looked at Marcus. Marcus felt something shift inside his chest. Not hope, not yet, something before hope. Recognition. The recognition of a person who knows something they shouldn't know, and knows it deeply enough to risk everything by saying it out loud. "No," Marcus said slowly. "No one's ever asked her that." Briggs stiffened. "Captain, this is not appropriate. She's a floor nurse with 6 weeks. "It's a question," Marcus said. "She can answer it." Ellie looked between the adults. She could feel the tension, the way the air had changed. She knew she was at the center of something she didn't fully understand, but she also knew that this woman, this nurse who had crouched down instead of standing over her, had asked her something that no one in 9 years of doctors and tests and scans had ever bothered to ask. "How do you feel?" Ellie took a breath. "It feels like something is asleep," she said carefully, "but not gone." Clara's chest tightened. Asleep, but not gone. 4 words. 4 words that contradicted 18 medical reports, 17 specialists, 9 years of conclusions written in permanent ink. Briggs scoffed lightly. Children often use imaginative language to describe. Sometimes, Clara said, her voice steady. That's because adults don't have better words for what they're feeling. Marcus raised his hand. Not sharply, not aggressively, the way a commander signals a room to hold. Doctor, he said, thank you. We're done for today. Briggs stared. Captain, we have documentation to... We're done, Marcus repeated. Briggs gathered his papers. His irritation was barely hidden. The controlled anger of a man who had never been interrupted by a nurse, in his own department, in his own hospital, in his own area of expertise. He left without another word. The room settled into silence. Clara realized she was still there, still standing in a room she had no authority to be in, having said things she had no credentials to say, in front of a decorated SEAL commander she had no relationship with. I should go, she said. Marcus didn't answer right away. He was watching Ellie, watching how she shifted in her wheelchair now that the tension had eased. A slight lean forward, a softening in her shoulders, the smallest uncurling of her fingers, alive, responsive, present. What did you see? He asked finally. Clara chose her words with the precision of someone who had learned that words, like hands, could heal or harm depending on how they were used. I saw responses that don't match the conclusions in her file. That's a serious thing to say. I know. You're a nurse. Yes, sir. And you're telling me 18 doctors might be wrong? Clara met his gaze. I'm saying they might not be asking the right questions. Ellie looked at Clara. You're not like the others, she said. Clara smiled gently. I've been told that. Marcus exhaled, long, slow, ragged. He looked tired. Not the tired of one bad night, the tired of 9 years of carrying something too heavy to put down and too painful to hold. Why are you really here? He asked. Clara didn't answer immediately. Her mind didn't go to classrooms or textbooks. It went to firelight and dirt floors, to voices speaking languages she'd learned by necessity, to hands that listened because listening was all they had. I learned some things overseas, she said finally, things that don't show up on charts. Marcus straightened. Where overseas? Clara hesitated. Places that don't make it into reports. A senior nurse appeared in the doorway. Clara, you're needed at the station. Clara nodded. She looked at Ellie one last time. Ellie was watching her with an expression Marcus had never seen on his daughter's face before. Not hope exactly, but something close. The look of a child who had just been seen, truly seen, for the first time. Can I come see you again? Clara asked. Ellie smiled. I'd like that. Clara left, and Marcus Cole stood alone in that room for a long time, staring at the empty doorway, feeling something crack open inside him that he'd welded shut years ago. That night, he sat on the edge of his bed in base housing and opened Ellie's file. Every scan, every note, every conclusion, page after page of certainty, written by men and women who had never once knelt down, looked his daughter in the eye, and asked her what she felt. He read until 200, and when he finally closed the folder, his hands were shaking. Not from fear, not from anger, from the terrifying, unbearable possibility that his daughter had been right all along. Asleep, but not gone. And somewhere in this hospital, a rookie nurse with 6 weeks on the job and a past she wouldn't talk about knew exactly how to wake her up. Marcus Cole did not sleep. He sat on the edge of the thin, military mattress in his temporary quarters at Walter Reed, Ellie's medical file open across his knees, reading the same paragraphs over and over until the words blurred and reformed and blurred again. 17 evaluations, 17 conclusions, every single one written with the absolute certainty of men and women who had spent more time looking at screens than looking at the child sitting in front of them. He closed the file at 0200, opened it again at 0215, closed it at 0230. Then he gave up pretending and just held it in his hands, staring at the wall, replaying one sentence in his head, like a mission briefing he couldn't decode. Asleep, but not gone. His daughter had said that. Not a doctor, not a specialist, not a researcher with 30 years of publications and a wall full of degrees. A 9-year-old girl in a wheelchair who had never been asked what she felt. Marcus pressed his palms against his eyes. He had spent his entire career trusting experts, trusting intelligence, trusting the chain of information that flowed from the people who knew things to the people who acted on them. That chain had kept him alive in places most Americans would never hear about. He believed in expertise the way he believed in gravity, not as an opinion, but as a law. But something was wrong with this file. He could feel it the way he felt tripwires, not by seeing them, but by sensing the space around them. Something was missing, not the data. The data was thorough. What was missing was a question, the one Clara Whitfield had asked. At 0400, he was back at the hospital. Ellie was already awake. She always was. 9 years of early appointments had trained her internal clock better than any alarm. She sat by the window in her wheelchair, watching the first gray light crawl across the glass. Couldn't sleep? Marcus asked softly. Too quiet, Ellie said. Marcus pulled a chair next to her. Same. They sat together in the kind of silence that only exists between people who have shared too many hospital rooms. Comfortable, heavy, full of things neither of them said. Then Ellie spoke. Dad? Yeah. Is the nurse coming back today? Marcus looked at her. I don't know, sweetheart. I hope she does. Ellie paused. She looked at me like I wasn't broken. Marcus felt those words hit somewhere behind his ribs, a place that no amount of training had ever taught him to armor. He reached over and took Ellie's hand. Her fingers were small and warm, and they gripped his with a strength that her file said shouldn't exist. You're not broken, he said. Then why does everyone keep trying to fix me? He didn't have an answer. He held her hand tighter and watched the light change outside the window and wished, not for the first time, not for the 100th time, that he could absorb this the way he absorbed everything else. Take the bullet, carry the weight, bring her home whole. But this was the one mission he had never been able to complete. At 0720, Clara Whitfield walked through the staff entrance of Walter Reed with her badge clipped to her scrubs and her stomach tight with the specific dread of someone who knows they have crossed a line they cannot uncross. She had replayed the conversation from room 412 in her head all night. Every word, every silence, the look on Briggs's face when she asked her question, the look on Marcus Cole's face when his daughter answered it. She knew what was coming. She had been in institutions long enough, military and otherwise, to know that the system didn't punish you for being wrong. It punished you for being right at the wrong time, in the wrong room, in front of the wrong people. She reached the nurse's station and felt the shift immediately. Not hostility, curiosity. The kind of quiet attention that meant people were watching to see what happened to her. The way bystanders watch a car that's already started to skid. Patricia Monroe looked up from her charts. 23 years at Walter Reed, steel gray hair, eyes that had seen every kind of mistake a young nurse could make and had cataloged them all. Harris, she said, Clara's last name on her badge. Conference room, 5 minutes. Clara nodded. She didn't ask why. 3 people were waiting when she walked in. Patricia, a department supervisor named Dr. Wallace, whose expression suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. And Dr. Nathan Briggs, who didn't sit, didn't smile, and didn't bother with pleasantries. Nurse Harris, Briggs said, yesterday you questioned a specialist's conclusion in front of a patient and her father. You implied a treatment pathway without authorization. You physically lingered in a restricted consultation after being dismissed. He paused. Is that accurate? Clara met his eyes. I asked a question. That's not how they see it, Patricia said. Briggs stepped forward. You're new here, so let me be very clear about how this hospital operates. We run on protocol, on evidence, on hierarchy. When you undermine that, even gently, even with a smile and a glass of water, you create risk. You create liability. You create hope where hope has no medical basis. Clara listened. She didn't interrupt. She had learned a long time ago that interrupting powerful men only made them louder. You are not here to diagnose, Briggs continued, his voice dropping. You are not here to theorize. You are here to assist. Do you understand? I understand, Clara said. Do you? Patricia asked, because yesterday looked like something else. Clara took a breath. She chose her next words knowing they would either save her or end her. With respect, ma'am, I assisted by paying attention. The room went cold. Briggs's jaw tightened. You have no background in neurology. No, sir. No specialty training beyond basic nursing. No, sir. And yet you felt comfortable implying that 18 physicians, 18, were wrong about a case they've studied for 9 years. Clara's voice stayed level. I felt comfortable implying that Ellie Cole deserved to be listened to. Patricia sighed. This isn't a philosophy seminar, Clara. Briggs straightened to his full height. This is your warning. One warning. You will not pursue this further. You will not discuss alternative theories with the family. You will perform your assigned duties and nothing else. If that presents a problem, you can request a transfer today. Are we clear? Clear, Clara said. Good, you're dismissed. She stood. She walked to the door. She put her hand on the handle, and then she stopped. Not because she intended to, but because something pulled at her the same way room 412 had pulled at her yesterday. A gravity she couldn't name. She turned back. Dr. Briggs. He looked at her with the flat expression of a man who considered the conversation finished. If Ellie Cole can feel her legs, Clara said quietly, and we ignore that because protocol says we should, who carries that? Briggs stared at her. His face didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted. A flicker, fast and involuntary, like a man who has just heard a sound in a building he was told was empty. Get out, he said. Clara left. At 0837, the charge nurse at the 4th floor station received a request she wasn't prepared for. Captain Marcus Cole, standing at the counter in full uniform, hands clasped behind his back, asked for Nurse Clara Whitfield by name. The charge nurse hesitated. Captain, Nurse Harris is assigned to general duties today. I can page another. I'll wait, Marcus said. His voice was quiet. His posture wasn't. There is a specific kind of authority that comes from a man who has commanded SEAL teams in combat. Not louder, not bigger, just absolute. The charge nurse picked up the phone. Patricia Monroe found Clara in the supply room 15 minutes later, restocking IV kits with the careful precision of someone who needed her hands busy to keep her mind from spinning. Room 412, Patricia said quietly. Clara looked up. Am I allowed? Patricia's expression softened by a fraction, just enough to be human. Just be careful, I mean it. Clara walked to room 412 with her heart beating the way it used to beat in places where the wrong step meant the wrong outcome. She pushed the door open. Marcus stood when she entered. Ellie's face changed the moment she heard Clara's voice. Not just a smile, something deeper. Recognition. Relief. The expression of someone who had been holding their breath and finally let it go. You came, Ellie said. I said I would, Clara replied. Marcus gestured to the chair. Clara sat. She folded her hands the way she always did when she was about to have a conversation that mattered. Deliberately, calmly, as if her body could anchor her mind. I stayed up with her file, Marcus said, all night. And? I read about motor inhibition, neural guarding, something called learned non-use. He paused. Things that don't show up on scans. Clara nodded slowly. They're easy to miss, especially when everyone's already decided what the answer is. Marcus leaned forward. His voice dropped. You said yesterday you learned things overseas. I need you to tell me where. I need you to tell me what. And I need you to tell me why a woman with that kind of knowledge is restocking supply closets at Walter Reed. Clara looked at Ellie first. Some of what I know isn't exactly bedtime story material. Ellie rolled her eyes. I'm 9, not 5. Clara almost laughed. She looked back at Marcus. South Africa, KwaZulu-Natal province, rural clinics, no electricity, no imaging equipment, no specialists, just hands and observation. Military? Clara paused. The pause was its own answer. Classified humanitarian operations. Marcus understood. He had lived inside that language his entire career. The words you use when the truth was real, but the details were someone else's property. What did you see in Ellie yesterday? He asked. Clara didn't reach for Ellie. She didn't touch her. She spoke carefully, the way a person speaks when they know their words are being weighed against 18 files full of certainty. I saw protective tension patterns. Her shoulders, her hands, her breathing, they all tell the same story. Her body isn't unresponsive, Captain. It's guarding. It learned early, maybe birth, maybe infancy, that movement led to failure, and failure led to pain. Not physical pain, emotional pain. The pain of watching people look at you with disappointment. The pain of trying and hearing someone say, it didn't work. Again, and again, and again. Marcus felt his throat close. So the brain shut it down, Clara continued. Not because the pathways are damaged, because the brain decided those pathways were dangerous. It locked the doors. And every test, every scan, every doctor who said permanent, they weren't reading damage. They were reading a defense mechanism, a wall that Ellie's own body built to protect her. The room was silent for 5 full seconds. Ellie spoke first. So my legs are scared? Clara turned to her. That's a really good way to put it. Scared of what? Of being told they can't. Marcus stood up. He walked to the window. He put his hand flat against the glass and pressed until his knuckles went white. Clara watched him and said nothing. She had seen this reaction before, not in patients' families, but in operators who had just been told that the mission they thought was over had never actually been completed. 9 years, Marcus said without turning around. 9 years I've been carrying her into these rooms. 9 years of hearing the same word, permanent. And you're telling me, his voice cracked. He stopped. He pressed harder against the glass. I'm telling you that Ellie's body remembers how to move, Clara said. It just needs someone to remind it that moving is safe. Marcus turned. His eyes were red. Can you do that? Clara shook her head. Ellie can do that. I can show her where the door is, but she has to walk through it herself. Ellie reached down and touched her own knee, lightly, carefully, like she was touching something she'd been told was broken and was testing whether it might not be. I want to try, she said. Marcus knelt in front of her. Sweetheart, you don't have to. Dad, Ellie looked at him with an expression that made Clara's chest ache. Not a child's expression, but a person's. Full and clear and certain. I've been trying to tell someone for years. Nobody listened. She listened. Marcus looked at Clara over his daughter's head. And in that look was everything. The exhaustion, the anger, the guilt, the desperate, terrifying possibility that hope might not be the enemy, after all. What do you need? He asked Clara. Time, she said, and for Dr. Briggs to not be in the room. He warned you off. Yes. This morning? 30 minutes ago. Marcus's expression changed. The softness left. What replaced it was something Clara recognized immediately. The operational calm of a man who had just identified an obstacle and was already calculating how to remove it. What exactly did he say? That I would not pursue this further. That I would not discuss alternative theories with the family. That if I had a problem, I should request a transfer. Marcus nodded once. And what did you say? I said, clear. Did you mean it? Clara met his eyes. No, sir. For the first time since Clara had met him, Marcus Cole almost smiled. It didn't quite reach his face, but it was there, in the set of his jaw, in the slight lift of his chin, in the way his shoulders shifted from burden-bearing to battle-ready. Then we have a problem, he said, because I just spent all night reading your file. Clara's stomach dropped. My personnel file? I have friends in places that keep files on people whose files don't say enough. Clara went very still. What did you find? Enough to know that KwaZulu-Natal isn't the whole story. Enough to know you were attached to something that operated under JSOC oversight in 3 countries that the State Department won't acknowledge. And enough to know that the technique you used yesterday, the one you said was older than modern neurology, didn't come from a village healer. Clara said nothing. It came from a program, Marcus continued, a program designed to rehabilitate assets whose bodies had been broken by interrogation. Operators who had been tortured until their nervous systems shut down. Men and women whose brains locked out their own limbs to survive pain. And someone, maybe you, maybe someone who trained you, figured out how to unlock them. Ellie looked between them. She didn't understand all the words, but she understood the weight. Is that true? Ellie asked Clara. Clara knelt so she was at Ellie's level, eye to eye, the way she always did. I learned how to help people whose bodies forgot they were safe, she said. That part is true. And you think my body forgot? I think your body is the smartest one in this building. It did exactly what it needed to do to protect you. And now it's time to tell it that it doesn't have to protect you anymore. The door to room 412 opened hard, not knocked, opened. Dr. Nathan Briggs stood in the frame, white coat sharp, file in his hand, 2 hospital security officers visible behind him in the hallway. Nurse Harris, he said, stand up and step away from the patient. Clara stood slowly. Marcus positioned himself between Briggs and Ellie without thinking about it. Muscle memory, the automatic response of a man who had spent his life putting his body between threats and the people he was sworn to protect. She's here at my request, Marcus said. She's here in violation of a direct administrative warning, Briggs replied, and you're enabling it. I'm protecting my daughter. You're jeopardizing her care. What care? Marcus's voice went flat and hard. You just told me yesterday there's nothing left to do. So what exactly am I jeopardizing? Briggs pointed at Clara. This woman has no credentials, no authority, and no business telling a patient's family that 18 evaluations are wrong. Clara spoke before Marcus could. I didn't say they were wrong. I said they were incomplete. Briggs turned on her. That's the same thing. No, it isn't. Wrong means the data is bad. Incomplete means the question was never asked. And what question is that? Briggs snapped. Whether Ellie's body is damaged, Clara said, or defending itself. Briggs laughed. Not a warm laugh, not an amused laugh. The sharp, cutting laugh of a man who has spent 20 years building an empire of certainty and has just watched a stranger try to pull out the foundation stone. Defending itself, he repeated. That's your theory. A 9-year-old's legs are, what, hiding? Playing pretend? Guarding, Clara said. There's a clinical difference. There's no clinical anything about what you're doing. You're a 6-week nurse with a savior complex feeding false hope to a desperate father, and I will not allow it. Marcus stepped forward. 1 step, just one, but it changed everything in the room. Doctor, he said, and his voice had dropped to the register that his teams recognize as the last warning before action. You will not speak about my daughter like she's a case study. You will not speak to this nurse like she's beneath you. And you will not stand in that doorway with security behind you like my child is a threat to be managed. Briggs's face flushed. Captain, I'm trying to protect. You're trying to protect your conclusion, Marcus said. There's a difference. Ellie's voice cut through the room like a blade through silk, small, clear, and devastating. "I can feel them," she said. Every adult in the room turned to her. "I can feel my legs," Ellie said again. "I've always been able to feel them. I just couldn't make anyone believe me." Briggs opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Clara knelt beside Ellie's wheelchair. "Tell them what you told me yesterday." Ellie looked directly at Briggs. "They're asleep, but they're not gone. I've been saying that since I was little, but nobody wrote it down because it didn't match the tests." Briggs shook his head. "Subjective sensation in cases of congenital motor." "She's not a case," Marcus said. "She's talking to you. Listen." The security officers in the hallway shifted uncomfortably. Patricia Monroe appeared behind them, face tight, reading the situation with the speed of someone who had navigated hospital politics for over 2 decades. "Dr. Briggs," Patricia said carefully, "perhaps we should continue this discussion in a less—" "There's nothing to discuss," Briggs said. "This nurse is removed from this patient's care effective immediately. Security will escort her." "Touch her," Marcus said quietly, "and I will file a formal complaint with the hospital commander, the base commander, and the Surgeon General's office before lunch." The room froze. Briggs stared at Marcus. Marcus stared back. Neither man moved. The silence was so complete that Clara could hear Ellie's breathing. Steady, controlled. The breathing of a child who had spent her whole life watching adults fight about her body and had learned to stay perfectly still during the storm. Briggs broke first. He always would have. Because Marcus Cole had been trained to hold positions that could not be held, and Nathan Briggs had only ever been trained to be right. "This isn't over," Briggs said. "No," Marcus agreed. "It isn't." Briggs turned and walked out. The security officers followed. Patricia stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at Clara with an expression that was equal parts warning and something Clara didn't expect: respect. "You've got maybe 48 hours, Patricia said quietly. "That's how long it'll take him to get administration involved. Use them wisely." Then she was gone. The room was still. Clara exhaled. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline dump that comes after a confrontation you've been bracing for since the moment you decided to stop being invisible. Marcus sat down heavily in the chair beside Ellie. He rubbed his face with both hands. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. "Clara," he said. "Yes, sir. My daughter just told a room full of adults that she can feel her legs. She said she's been saying it for years, and He stopped. His jaw worked. "I never heard her. I was so busy listening to doctors that I never—" "Dad," Ellie said. She reached out and put her hand on his arm. "It's okay." "It's not okay," Marcus whispered. "I'm your father." "You're here now," Ellie said. "That's what matters." Clara watched them and felt something crack open in her own chest. The thing she kept locked away. The thing that had driven her out of black site medicine and into nursing scrubs. The thing that made her kneel in front of strangers' children and ask questions that got her fired. The belief, stubborn, irrational, unscientific, that the body never lies. That it speaks constantly in a language most doctors have forgotten how to hear. And that sometimes all it takes to change everything is one person who still remembers how to listen. "Captain Cole," Clara said. Marcus looked at her. "We have 48 hours. I need you to trust me." Marcus Cole studied her face the way he studied terrain before an insertion, looking for weakness, for deception, for the thing that didn't belong. He found none. "What's the plan?" he asked. Clara looked at Ellie. "Tomorrow morning, early, before Briggs gets here, I'm going to show your daughter something that isn't in any textbook in this hospital. And if it doesn't work, then I'll pack my things and you'll never see me again." Ellie shook her head. "It'll work." Clara smiled at her. "How do you know?" Ellie looked down at her legs, the legs that 18 doctors had written off, the legs that she had spent 9 years whispering to in the dark when nobody was listening. Because they've been waiting, she said. They've been waiting a really long time. Clara stood. She had to leave before her composure broke, before the weight of what she had just committed to became visible on her face. She walked to the door, paused, and looked back. Marcus was holding Ellie's hand. Ellie was looking at her own knees. And the room was filled with something that hadn't been there 24 hours ago. Not certainty, not proof, not science. Just the raw, terrifying, magnificent possibility that everyone had been wrong. Clara arrived at Walter Reed at 0437. The hallways were empty except for the overnight nurses finishing charting and the soft, mechanical hum of machines keeping bodies alive. She walked with the same measured steps she always used. Head up, badge visible, nothing about her that would make anyone look twice. But her hands were cold, and her pulse was running higher than it should have been. And she knew that what she was about to do would either justify every sacrifice she had ever made or destroy the only career she had left. She had not slept. She had spent the night sitting on the floor of her apartment with her back against the wall, holding a small leather journal she hadn't opened in 2 years. Inside it were notes she had written in places the State Department wouldn't acknowledge. Sketches of pressure points, hand positions, breathing sequences, observations recorded in cramped handwriting by flashlight. The techniques in that journal had no names that American medicine would recognize. They had no peer-reviewed studies. They had no clinical trials. What they had were results. Results she had seen with her own eyes in bodies that had been broken by things far worse than diagnosis. She closed the journal at 300 and didn't open it again. She didn't need to. Everything in those pages lived in her hands. Patricia Monroe was already at the nurse's station when Clara rounded the corner. Patricia looked up and their eyes met. Neither woman spoke for a moment. Then Patricia glanced down the hallway toward room 412 and back at Clara. "He's been awake since 3, Patricia said quietly. "Hasn't left her side." Clara nodded. "And Briggs?" "Doesn't come in before 7. You've got about 2 hours. Patricia hesitated, then added, "I didn't tell you that." "Tell me what?" Clara said. Patricia almost smiled. Almost. Clara pushed open the door to room 412 at 0441. Marcus was standing by the window, still in the same clothes from yesterday, arms crossed, the posture of a man who had been standing watch all night because standing watch was the only thing he knew how to do when he couldn't control the outcome. Ellie was awake. Her eyes found Clara the moment the door moved. "You're early," Ellie said. "Couldn't sleep," Clara replied. "Me neither." Ellie looked at her father. "He hasn't sat down in 4 hours." Marcus turned. His face was drawn, his eyes bloodshot, but there was something in them that hadn't been there 2 days ago. Not hope exactly, readiness. The look of a man who had decided to commit to a mission, regardless of the odds. "Is this really happening?" he asked Clara. "Only if Ellie wants it to." "I want it to," Ellie said immediately. Clara pulled the chair close to Ellie's wheelchair and sat. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, hands open. "Ellie, I need to explain something to you before we start. What I'm going to do isn't magic. It isn't a miracle. It's just a conversation between my hands and your body." "Okay," Ellie said. "Your body has been protecting you for a very long time. It decided, probably before you were old enough to remember, that keeping your legs still was safer than letting them move. And every time a doctor said you couldn't walk, every time a test showed no response, your body heard that and said, 'See, I was right to shut down. Moving isn't safe.' Does that make sense?" Ellie thought about it. "Like when I stopped raising my hand in class because my teacher never called on me anyway." Clara felt her breath catch. "Exactly like that." Marcus's jaw tightened. He didn't speak. "What we're going to do," Clara continued, "is tell your body that it's safe to try. Not force it, not trick it, just remind it. I'm going to touch certain places on your legs, gently, and I want you to close your eyes and think about the feeling. Not about moving, just about feeling. Can you do that?" Ellie nodded. If anything hurts, you tell me and we stop. It won't hurt, Ellie said, with a certainty that surprised both adults. Clara looked at Marcus. Captain, I need you to do something hard. Name it. Don't react. Whatever happens, whatever doesn't happen, keep your face still. She's going to be reading you. If you show fear, her body will lock up. If you show excitement, her body will try to perform instead of respond. I need you to be neutral. Marcus stared at her. You're asking a father to watch his daughter try to walk for the first time and not react. I'm asking a SEAL commander to hold position. Something shifted in Marcus's expression. He understood that language. Copy, he said quietly. Clara turned back to Ellie. Ready? Ellie took a deep breath. Ready. Clara placed 2 fingers on Ellie's right ankle, lightly, barely touching, not pressing, not manipulating, just resting, the way you might rest your hand on a friend's shoulder to let them know you're there. Close your eyes, Clara said. Ellie closed them. Don't try to move. I know that sounds strange. Everyone has always told you to try. I'm telling you to stop trying. Just feel my fingers. Feel where they are. Feel the warmth. Silence. 10 seconds. 20. Marcus stood motionless by the window. His hands were behind his back, fingers interlocked so tightly his knuckles had gone white. His face betrayed nothing. His heart was slamming against his ribs so hard he was certain both women could hear it. Good, Clara whispered. Now I want you to imagine, just imagine, that your toes are listening to music. Don't move them, just let them hear it. Ellie's brow furrowed slightly. What kind of music? Whatever you want. A pause. My mom sings this song when she thinks I'm asleep. Marcus made a sound, barely audible, a catch in his throat that he strangled before it became anything. Clara didn't look at him. Let your toes hear that song, Clara said. 30 seconds of absolute silence. The clock on the wall ticked. A cart rolled somewhere down the hallway. The world continued outside room 412, as if nothing extraordinary was happening inside it. Then Ellie's toes moved. Not a twitch, not a spasm, a curl. Small, deliberate, conscious. The toes of her right foot curling inward like a hand closing around something precious. Marcus's knees buckled. He caught himself against the wall with one hand and locked his body rigid. Jaw clenched, eyes burning, every muscle engaged in the effort of not dropping to the floor and sobbing. Clara didn't react. She kept her voice exactly the same, steady, warm, unhurried. Ellie, did you feel that? Ellie's eyes were still closed. Yes, her voice was trembling. I felt them. Good, that's your body remembering. They're warm, Ellie whispered. They haven't been warm in so long. Clara moved her fingers higher, to a point just above the ankle bone. She pressed, gently but with precision, targeting a spot that she had learned from a woman named Tandy in a tin-roofed clinic 6,000 miles from this hospital. Tandy had called it the gate. Not because it was a medical term, but because when you found it, the body opened. Now, Clara said, same thing, don't try to move, just feel. Ellie concentrated, her face tightened. Clara watched the cascade, first the tension, then the resistance, then the softening. The same pattern she had seen in adults whose bodies had been locked down by trauma. The body fights first, then it listens. Ellie's foot shifted. Not her toes this time, her entire foot. A rotation at the ankle, small, unsteady, but deliberate, controlled, voluntary. Marcus pressed his back against the wall and slid down 2 inches before catching himself. His eyes were flooding. He bit the inside of his cheek hard enough to taste blood. Ellie, Clara said, open your eyes. Ellie opened them. She looked down at her foot, the foot that 18 doctors had said would never move by her command, the foot that every scan, every test, every evaluation had declared permanently impaired. It was pointing toward Clara. Ellie had turned it. She had aimed it. She had moved it because she wanted to. "Dad," Ellie said, and her voice cracked wide open. "Dad, look!" Marcus gave up. He dropped to his knees beside her wheelchair and grabbed her hand with both of his and pressed it against his forehead, and couldn't speak because the sound that was trying to come out of his chest wasn't a word. It was 9 years of grief hitting oxygen for the first time. Clara sat back. Her own eyes were wet, but her hands were steady. She gave them the moment. Some things belong only to the people inside them. "I told you," Ellie said through tears, laughing at the same time. "I told everyone. They're not gone." Marcus lifted his head. He looked at Clara with the expression of a man who has just been pulled from water he didn't know he was drowning in. "What do we do now?" Clara wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "We do it again, slowly. The door banged open. Dr. Nathan Briggs stood in the doorway. 0627. He was early. Behind him, the department supervisor, Dr. Wallace, and 2 security officers. "I was informed you were on this floor," Briggs said to Clara. His voice was controlled, but his face was white with anger. "I explicitly instructed you." "She moved her foot," Marcus said from the floor. Briggs stopped. "My daughter moved her foot," Marcus repeated. He stood, slowly, the way a large animal stands when it decides it's done lying down. On command, voluntarily, 30 seconds ago. Briggs looked at Ellie. Ellie looked back at him. She was still crying, still smiling, still radiating the stunned joy of a child who has just discovered that the world lied to her about herself. "That's not possible," Briggs said. "It happened," Marcus said. Briggs turned to Clara. "What did you do to her?" "I didn't do anything to her. I talked to her. I touched her ankle. She did the rest." "That's absurd. There's no mechanism by which simple, tactile contact could override a congenital." "Then explain why her foot is pointed at me right now," Clara said. Every person in the doorway looked at Ellie's foot. It was still rotated, still pointing toward Clara. Ellie hadn't moved it back. She was holding it there, shakily, imperfectly, but intentionally. Briggs's face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds. Disbelief, confusion, and then something Clara recognized with cold clarity. Fear. Not fear for the patient, fear for himself. Fear of what it meant if this was real. "This proves nothing," Briggs said. "Involuntary spasticity can mimic—" "Ask her," Marcus said. "Ask my daughter to move her foot. Right now, in front of you." Briggs shook his head. "That's not how we conduct—" "Ask her." The room was silent. The security officers looked uncomfortable. Dr. Wallace looked like he wanted to be in a different building. Patricia Monroe appeared at the edge of the doorway, watching. Briggs straightened his coat. He stepped forward. He looked down at Ellie with the clinical detachment of a man who had spent 2 decades trusting instruments over instinct. "Ellie," he said, "can you move your right foot to the left?" Ellie looked at Clara. Clara gave her nothing. No nod, no smile, no signal. This had to come from Ellie alone. Ellie looked back at Briggs. She took a breath. Her foot didn't move. Briggs exhaled. "You're scaring her," Clara said sharply. "Excuse me?" "You're standing over her with security behind you and anger on your face, and you're asking her to perform. Her body reads threat. It's doing exactly what it was trained to do. It's shutting down." Briggs turned red. "I am not a threat to this child." "Then stop acting like one," Marcus said. Briggs spun toward Marcus. "Captain, I have tolerated—" "Step back," a new voice said. Everyone turned. Dr. Helen Pratt stood at the end of the hallway. She walked toward them with the unhurried authority of someone who outranked everyone in the corridor and knew it. Civilian clothes, military bearing, credentials that no one in that hospital questioned. "Dr. Pratt," Briggs said, "this is an internal—" "Captain Cole filed a formal objection at 0500 this morning," Pratt said. "I was notified at 0530. I've been reviewing the file since 0545. She looked into room 412, looked at Ellie, looked at Clara, looked at the security officers. Clear the hallway, now! The security officers left. Dr. Wallace left. Briggs didn't move. Nathan, Pratt said, step out of the room. I will not abandon my... It wasn't a request. Briggs stared at her. His jaw worked. Then he turned sharply and walked out. Patricia followed, pulling the door half closed behind her. Dr. Pratt entered the room alone. She pulled a chair to a neutral distance from Ellie, not too close, not too far, and sat. Ellie, she said. Her voice was warm but measured. My name is Dr. Pratt. I'm not here to test you. I'm here to watch. Is that okay? Ellie studied her face the way children study adults when they're deciding whether to trust them. Not by what they say, but by how they sit, how they breathe, whether their eyes match their words. Okay, Ellie said. Pratt looked at Clara. Nurse Whitfield, do what you did. Clara knelt in front of Ellie again. She placed her fingers on Ellie's ankle. The same spot, the same pressure. She felt Ellie's pulse through her fingertips, faster than before, charged with adrenaline and fear and the residue of Briggs's confrontation. Hey, Clara said gently, it's just us. There's a lot of people, Ellie whispered. Forget them. Look at me. Just me. Ellie's eyes locked onto Clara's, brown meeting blue, 9 years old meeting a lifetime of quiet knowing. Remember the song? Clara asked. Ellie almost smiled. Mom's song. Let your toes hear it again. 10 seconds. 15. Ellie's toes curled. Pratt leaned forward. Clara moved her hand higher. The gate. Now feel this. Don't push. Just feel. Ellie's foot rotated, clean and clear. Marcus, standing against the wall with his arms crossed and his face locked in the neutral expression Clara had asked for, felt tears running down his cheeks. He didn't wipe them. He didn't move. More, Ellie whispered. Clara looked at her. What do you mean? There's more. I can feel more. Higher. Clara hesitated. She hadn't planned to go further today. The protocol, if you could call techniques learned in tin-roofed clinics a protocol, was gradual, gentle, layer by layer, giving the nervous system time to adjust, time to believe that each new unlocked pathway was safe. But Ellie's eyes were fierce. Please, she said, I've been waiting 9 years. Clara looked at Pratt. Pratt nodded once. Clara moved both hands to Ellie's lower legs, just below the knee. She applied pressure at 2 specific points, bilaterally, simultaneously, with a precision that came from muscle memory burned into her during months of practice on bodies that had forgotten themselves. She pressed and held. Ellie gasped. Not pain, surprise. The surprise of feeling a door open in a room you forgot existed. What is that? Ellie breathed. That's your legs waking up, Clara said. Ellie's knees shifted, both of them, outward, then inward, then outward again, like someone testing a hinge that had been rusted for years. Pratt stood up from her chair. Ellie, Clara said, I want you to try something. Don't think about standing. Don't think about walking. I just want you to push your feet against the floor, like you're pressing on a gas pedal. Can you do that? Ellie pressed. Her feet flattened against the footrest of her wheelchair. The muscles in her calves, muscles that had been declared non-functional by 18 separate medical professionals, contracted visibly beneath her skin. Marcus made a sound. He tried to stop it, but he couldn't. It was a sob. One single broken sob that he swallowed so fast, it barely made it past his throat. But Ellie heard it. She looked at him. Don't cry, Dad, she said. I'm doing it. I know, Marcus whispered. I know you are. Clara placed her hands on Ellie's knees. One more thing, and this is the hard one. I'm going to count to 3. On 3, I want you to push up. Not stand, just push, like you're trying to make yourself taller in the chair. Okay, 1. Ellie's hands gripped the armrests. 2. Her jaw set, her eyes narrowed, the same expression Marcus made before breaching a door. 3. Ellie pushed. Her body rose 2 inches out of the wheelchair. 2 inches. The distance between a verdict and a revolution. Her arms trembled, her legs shook. Her face went red with effort, but she was up, lifted by her own legs for the first time in 9 years. She held it for 3 seconds. Then she collapsed back into the chair, gasping, laughing, crying all at once. Marcus broke. He crossed the room in 2 steps and dropped to his knees and wrapped his arms around his daughter and held her so tightly that Clara had to look away because some moments are too sacred to witness. "I did it," Ellie sobbed. "Dad, I did it." "Did you see?" "I saw," Marcus said into her hair, his voice shattered. "I saw, baby. I saw." Dr. Pratt stood very still. Her face was professionally neutral, but her hand was gripping the back of the chair so hard her fingers were white. She watched for another 10 seconds. Then she spoke. "Nurse Whitfield." Clara looked up. "This evaluation is suspended," Pratt said. "Effective immediately." Marcus raised his head. "What does that mean?" "It means we are no longer evaluating whether Ellie can move." Pratt looked directly at Clara with an expression that held 20 questions and 1 certainty. "We are evaluating how far this goes." She turned and opened the door. Briggs was standing in the hallway. He had heard the sounds. He had heard the crying and the laughter. His face was gray. "Dr. Briggs," Pratt said, "you will order a full neurological reassessment for Ellie Cole. New imaging, new motor response testing, everything from scratch." "On what grounds?" Briggs asked, but his voice had lost its edge. "On the grounds that your patient just lifted herself out of a wheelchair." Briggs looked past Pratt into the room. He saw Ellie, face flushed and streaked with tears, grinning wider than any child he had ever seen in that hospital. He saw Marcus on his knees, still holding his daughter's hand. He saw Clara standing quietly to the side, hands folded, face calm, eyes shining. He looked at Ellie's legs, at the muscles still quivering from effort, at the footrest where her feet had pushed down with force that his own file said was impossible. "That's not," he started. "It is," Pratt said. "Document everything you just heard. Everything." Briggs stood in that hallway for a long time after Pratt walked away. He stood there while nurses passed and carts rolled, and the hospital moved around him the way rivers move around rocks. Steadily, indifferently, without stopping. He stood there until the sounds from room 412 faded and the hallway emptied, and he was alone with the file he was still holding in his hands. 18 evaluations, 17 doctors before him, every one of them certain, every one of them thorough, every one of them wrong. He opened the file. He looked at his own notes from 2 days ago, the neat handwriting, the confident conclusions, non-progressive, permanent, no indication of change. He closed the file. His hands were shaking. Inside room 412, Ellie was still holding Marcus's hand. Clara was packing up, preparing to leave before someone remembered that she was still, technically, in violation of a direct order. "Clara," Ellie said. Clara turned. "Will you come back tomorrow?" Clara looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at her with the expression of a man who has just watched the impossible happen and has not yet found the words for it. "She'll be here," Marcus said. Not a question, not a request. The voice of a SEAL commander who had just identified his most valuable operator and was not going to let anyone remove her from the mission. Clara nodded. "I'll be here." She walked out of room 412 at 06:58. 2 minutes before Briggs's normal arrival time. 2 minutes before the hospital's official day began. 2 minutes on the right side of a line she had obliterated. Patricia was waiting at the nurse's station. She didn't say anything. She just looked at Clara with an expression that said, "I heard, I know, and God help you for what comes next." Clara picked up her charts and went back to work. Her hands were steady. Her badge still said, Rookie Nurse. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a voice she hadn't heard in 2 years, Tandy's voice, warm and knowing and ancient, whispered the same words she had whispered in that tin-roofed clinic on the night Clara had first learned to listen with her hands. The body never forgets. It just waits for someone brave enough to ask. The new imaging results came back at 14:30 that same afternoon. Dr. Pratt opened the file in her office and read it twice. Then she read it a third time because the first 2 readings had produced a response in her that she didn't trust. A tightening in her stomach, a quickening of her pulse, the physical signature of a scientist confronting data that shouldn't exist. She picked up the phone and called Marcus Cole directly. Captain, I need you and your daughter in my office. Bring Nurse Whitfield. Marcus didn't ask why. He heard the tone. He'd heard that tone 1,000 times. The voice of a commanding officer who has just received intelligence that changes the entire operational picture. He hung up and looked at Clara, who had been sitting quietly by Ellie's bed, reviewing her own notes. Pratt wants us, he said. All 3 of us. Clara nodded. She stood and helped Ellie into her wheelchair without a word. Ellie looked between them, reading the air the way she always did, with the precision of a child who had spent her entire life learning to decode adult silence. Is it bad? Ellie asked. I don't know yet, Marcus said honestly. You always say that when it's bad. I also say it when I genuinely don't know. They moved through the hallway together, Clara pushing Ellie's chair, Marcus walking beside them, 3 people bound together by something that had no name yet. Not friendship, not obligation, something forged in the space between a question no one asked and an answer no one expected. Dr. Pratt was standing when they entered, not sitting behind her desk, not leaning against it, standing in the middle of the room with the imaging file in her hands and an expression on her face that Clara had never seen on a physician. The look of someone holding proof that the rules just changed. Sit down, Pratt said. Marcus sat. Clara positioned Ellie's chair and remained standing. Pratt looked at her. You too, Nurse Whitfield. Clara sat. Pratt opened the file on her desk and turned it so all 3 of them could see. This morning's MRI, Ellie's brain, specifically the motor cortex and the corticospinal tract. She pointed to a cluster of bright spots on the image. Do you see these? Marcus leaned forward. What am I looking at? Activity, Pratt said. Neural activity in regions that every prior scan, all 17 of them, showed as dormant. Not damaged, not atrophied, dormant, as in silent, as in present but not firing. Clara's breath stopped. This morning, Pratt continued, after whatever happened in room 412, these regions lit up. Not partially, not ambiguously. They lit up like someone flipped a switch. She paused. Dr. Briggs's original assessment described permanent congenital motor impairment. What this imaging shows is something fundamentally different. These pathways aren't impaired, they were suppressed. Marcus stared at the scans. Suppressed. The brain shut them down, Pratt said, voluntarily early in development. And it kept them shut down because nothing in Ellie's environment, no treatment, no therapy, no evaluation, ever gave it a reason to turn them back on. Marcus looked at Clara. His eyes were burning. You knew. I suspected, Clara said quietly. You more than suspected. You walked into that room and you saw exactly what was happening. Clara met his gaze. I've seen it before, Captain. In adults. In soldiers. In people whose bodies shut down under extreme conditions and never got the signal that the conditions had changed. Ellie's body did the same thing. It just did it earlier. Pratt set the file down. I need to be transparent with both of you about what happens next. This imaging changes Ellie's diagnosis. Formally. The word permanent comes off the record. The word disabled is under clinical review. Ellie had been listening without speaking. Her hands were gripping the armrests of her wheelchair the way they always did when adults discussed her future in front of her. But this time, something in her grip was different, looser, like she was holding on by choice instead of habit. "Does that mean I'm not disabled anymore?" she asked. Pratt crouched slightly, bringing herself closer to Ellie's level, a gesture Clara noticed and respected. "It means we were wrong about what disabled meant for you, Ellie. Your body isn't broken. It was protecting itself. And now that it's starting to wake up, we need to figure out how far it can go." "I already know how far," Ellie said. "How far?" "All the way." Pratt looked at Clara. Clara looked at Ellie. And Marcus Cole sat in that chair feeling something he hadn't felt since the day his daughter was born. The terrifying, weightless, uncontrollable freefall of believing that everything might actually be okay. The call to Rachel came at 1500. Marcus stepped into the hallway and dialed the number he knew better than any tactical frequency. She answered on the first ring. "How bad?" Rachel said immediately. It was always her first word after Ellie's appointments. How bad, never how good. 9 years of conditioning. Marcus couldn't speak for a moment. "Marcus," Rachel said, her voice tightening. "Talk to me. How bad?" "She moved her legs," Marcus said. Silence. "Rachel, Ellie moved her legs, on her own, voluntarily." He heard a sharp intake of breath. Then nothing. Then a sound that reached through the phone and tore him open. The raw, gutted sob of a mother who had spent 9 years building a wall around her heart and just felt it collapse. "Don't, Marcus, don't say that if it's not." "I watched it happen. I was in the room." She curled her toes. She rotated her foot. She pushed herself up out of her chair. "Rachel," she lifted herself up. Rachel was crying too hard to form words. Marcus leaned against the hallway wall and pressed the phone against his ear and let his own tears fall, because there was no one watching, and even if there were, he was past caring. "There's a nurse," he said, "a young nurse named Clara. She did something. She knows something. I can't explain it yet, but she reached Ellie in a way no one ever has." "I'm coming," Rachel said. "I'm coming right now." "Rachel, don't tell me to wait. Don't you dare. I'm coming." She hung up. Marcus stood in the hallway with the phone still pressed to his face, eyes closed, chest heaving, and allowed himself 10 seconds of pure, unguarded emotion. 10 seconds of being a father instead of a commander. Then he straightened, wiped his face, and walked back into the room. Rachel Cole arrived at Walter Reed at 1647. She had driven 45 minutes in 30. She hadn't changed out of the clothes she'd been wearing when the phone rang. She hadn't fixed her hair. She hadn't done anything except grab her keys and run. She came through the door of Pratt's office with red eyes and shaking hands and stopped dead when she saw Ellie sitting in her wheelchair with an expression Rachel had never seen on her daughter's face before. Not happiness, not excitement, certainty. The face of a child who had finally been told the truth about herself and was still absorbing the scale of it. "Mom," Ellie said. Rachel dropped to her knees in front of the wheelchair and put her hands on Ellie's face and looked at her the way you look at something you've been mourning that has just walked back into the room alive. "Show me," Rachel whispered. "Baby, show me." Ellie looked at Clara. Clara nodded. Ellie closed her eyes. She breathed once. Her toes curled, her feet pressed against the footrest, her knees shifted outward. Rachel made a sound that had no language. She collapsed forward onto Ellie's lap, arms wrapped around her daughter's waist, forehead against Ellie's stomach, and cried the way people cry when they've been holding grief so long it has become part of their skeleton, and suddenly the bone cracks and everything floods out at once. Marcus put his hand on Rachel's shoulder. Rachel reached up and grabbed it without lifting her head. The three of them stayed like that, connected, broken open, rebuilt, while Clara stood quietly against the wall, and felt the ache in her own chest that she had learned to live with a long time ago. The ache of watching families receive the things she had spent her life trying to give, knowing that her own had never received it. Pratt waited until Rachel was ready. Then she explained the imaging, the suppression, the dormant pathways, the misdiagnosis. Rachel listened with the fierce concentration of a woman who had spent 9 years being told there was nothing to hope for, and was now being told there was everything. "So what happens now?" Rachel asked, her voice raw. "Rehabilitation," Pratt said. "Real rehabilitation, not maintenance therapy, active neurological retraining." "How long?" "Weeks, possibly months. We're in uncharted territory." "And the nurse?" Rachel looked at Clara. "You did this?" Clara shook her head. "Ellie did this. I just asked her body a question it had been waiting to hear." Rachel stood and crossed the room and did something Clara didn't expect. She took Clara's face in both hands and kissed her forehead. "Thank you," Rachel said. "Thank you for seeing my daughter." Clara's composure cracked for the first time since this had started. Just a fraction. Just enough for one tear to escape before she blinked it away and nodded and said, "She made it easy." The next morning started at 5:30 with Clara, Ellie, and a physical therapy room that had been cleared specifically for them by Pratt's order. Marcus and Rachel stood behind a glass partition, watching. Pratt observed from a chair in the corner, taking notes. Clara started the same way, fingers on Ellie's ankles, the gait, the warmth, the invitation. "Remember," Clara said, "we don't force anything. We ask." Ellie nodded. She was different today. The fear was gone. In its place was something Clara had seen only a handful of times in her life. A body that had decided to trust. Not cautiously, not partially, completely. Clara worked up from the ankles to the knees. Each point she touched produced a response. Not immediate, not dramatic, but steady. Muscle engagement. Voluntary contraction. The slow, deliberate awakening of a system that had been offline for 9 years. After 40 minutes, Clara leaned back. "Ellie, I want to try something we haven't done before." "Okay." "I want you to stand." Rachel's hand flew to her mouth behind the glass. Marcus put his arm around her shoulders and held her still. "Not alone," Clara said quickly. "I'm going to hold you. But I want your legs to do the work. I want you to feel the floor." Ellie gripped the armrests. "I'm scared." "I know." "What if I fall?" "Then I catch you. That's the deal." Ellie looked through the glass at her parents. Rachel was crying silently. Marcus gave her a single nod. The nod, Ellie knew, that meant, "I'm here. Go." Clara positioned herself in front of Ellie, hands under Ellie's arms, feet braced. "On 3, push up with your legs. I'll hold your weight until you're ready." 1, Ellie's fingers turned white on the armrests. 2, her jaw set, her eyes locked onto Clara's. 3, Ellie pushed, Clara lifted, and for the second time in 48 hours, Ellie Cole rose out of her wheelchair. But this time, she kept rising, past the 2 inches of yesterday, past the height of the armrests, up, until she was standing, trembling, shaking, alive, with her feet on the floor and her legs holding weight, and Clara's arms the only thing between her and gravity. "I'm up," Ellie gasped. "Clara, I'm up." "You're up," Clara confirmed, her voice thick. "Let go a little." Clara hesitated. "Ellie, let go a little." Clara loosened her grip by inches. Ellie swayed. Her knees buckled. Clara caught her. Ellie pushed back up. "Again," Ellie said. Clara loosened again. Ellie held. 5 seconds. 7. 10. Behind the glass, Rachel turned her face into Marcus's chest and sobbed. Marcus held her with one arm and pressed his other hand flat against the glass and watched his daughter stand for the first time since she was born. And he thought about every doorway that had been too narrow, every playground she had watched from the sideline, every night Rachel had cried in the shower, Every doctor who had said, permanent. Every report that had said, done. And he felt every single one of those moments lift off his shoulders like birds released from a cage. "I want to walk," Ellie said. Clara's heart slammed. "Ellie, it's too soon. Your muscles need time to—" "One step. Just one. Please." Clara looked at Pratt through the glass. Pratt was already standing. She didn't say no. She didn't say yes. She simply watched, pen frozen over her notepad, as a 9-year-old girl decided her own timeline. "One step," Clara said. "I'm right here." Ellie shifted her weight. Right foot. She lifted it, barely, an inch off the ground, and placed it forward. The motion was awkward, uncoordinated, the muscle memory of walking non-existent in a body that had never done it. But the intent was there. The signal was there. The brain fired. The nerve conducted. The muscle contracted. The foot moved forward, and Ellie Cole took her first step. Rachel screamed, not in fear, in something beyond joy, beyond relief, beyond any word that exists for the moment when you watch your child do the thing every doctor on earth told you she would never do. Marcus didn't scream. Marcus didn't make a sound. He pressed both hands against the glass and bowed his head, and his shoulders shook, and he let the tears fall without shame, without control, without the discipline he had spent 20 years building, because no amount of SEAL training prepares a father for watching his daughter take her first step at 9 years old. Ellie wobbled. Clara caught her. Ellie laughed, wild, breathless, disbelieving. "Did you see? Did everyone see?" "We saw," Clara said, and her own voice was wrecked. "We all saw." Pratt set down her notepad. She removed her glasses. She pressed the intercom button. "Bring Dr. Briggs to the observation room." Nathan Briggs arrived 4 minutes later. He walked in already defensive, already armed with the posture of a man who has been summoned to witness his own obsolescence. Pratt pointed through the glass. Ellie was back in her wheelchair, resting, drinking water, grinning at her parents who had come into the therapy room and were kneeling on either side of her, each holding one of her hands. Clara stood apart, arms crossed, watching them with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had done what she came to do. "She walked," Pratt said to Briggs. "One step, voluntary, weight-bearing, unassisted neural command." Briggs stared through the glass. His face went through something Clara would have recognized if she had been watching. The same cascade she saw in patients' bodies. First resistance, then fear, then the softening. "I want to see the imaging," he said quietly. "You'll get it. And the motor response data? You'll get that too." Briggs was silent for a long moment. Then he said something that surprised Pratt, surprised himself, and would have surprised every person in that hospital who had ever watched him command a room with unshakable certainty. "I owe that child an apology." Pratt looked at him. "Yes, you do." Briggs walked into the therapy room. Everyone went quiet. Ellie looked up at him, the man who had slammed her file on a table, who had brought security to her door, who had tried to silence the one person who had finally heard her. Briggs knelt, not the way doctors kneel, professionally, at arm's length. He knelt the way people kneel when their authority means nothing and their humanity is all they have left. "Ellie," he said, "I was wrong." Ellie studied his face. "About what?" "About you. About what your body could do. I trusted my tests more than I trusted you. And I'm sorry." Ellie looked at him for a long time. The room held its breath. "It's okay," she said finally. "You were scared too." Briggs's composure broke. His face crumpled and he pressed his fist against his mouth and nodded, because he couldn't speak, because a 9-year-old girl had just diagnosed him more accurately than he had ever diagnosed her. Clara watched from the corner of the room. She watched a man she had fought against kneel in front of the child he had written off, and she felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Not anger, not vindication, compassion. Because Nathan Briggs wasn't evil, he was certain. And certainty, she had learned in places far darker than this hospital, was the most dangerous form of blindness there was. Marcus stood behind Ellie's chair with his hand on her shoulder. Rachel stood beside him, fingers intertwined with his, tears still wet on her face. They looked at Clara across the room, and in their eyes was something that didn't need words. The gratitude of parents who had been drowning for 9 years and had just felt solid ground beneath their feet for the first time. Clara nodded, just once. Then she looked at Ellie, who was watching Briggs rise to his feet with the grace of a man who has just put down the heaviest thing he has ever carried. "Dr. Briggs," Ellie said. He turned back. "Yes? Can you write in my file that I walked today?" Briggs swallowed. "I'll write it myself." "Good." Ellie looked down at her legs. "Because I'm going to do it again tomorrow. And the day after that, and I want every page to know." Briggs nodded. He left the room without another word. Clara watched him go and knew, with the certainty of someone who had rebuilt enough broken things to recognize the sound, that Nathan Briggs had just started the longest rehabilitation of his career. Not of a patient's body, but of his own belief in what medicine was supposed to be. The door closed. The therapy room was quiet. Ellie leaned her head back against the wheelchair and closed her eyes. Exhausted, triumphant, 9 years old and already braver than most adults Clara had ever known. "Clara," Ellie murmured. "Yeah? Are you going to be here tomorrow?" Clara looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Rachel. Rachel looked at Clara with the raw, uncomplicated expression of a mother who had just one thing left to say. "You're not going anywhere," Rachel said. "Not while my daughter is learning to walk." Clara pressed her lips together. She nodded. She turned toward the door so no one would see her face, because the thing cracking open inside her chest was too big to hide and too old to name. And she needed 30 seconds in the hallway to put herself back together before the world asked her to be steady again. She made it to the corridor before the first tear fell. She leaned against the wall, pressed her hand over her mouth, and let it come. Not grief, not joy, something between. Something that only people who have spent their lives saving others while losing themselves would understand. Tandy's voice again, distant and warm. "You cannot pour from an empty vessel, but you keep pouring anyway. That is what makes you dangerous, and that is what makes you necessary." Clara wiped her face, straightened her scrubs, clipped her badge back into place. "Rookie nurse," she almost laughed. Ellie Cole took 3 steps the next morning, then 5. Then on the 3rd day, she crossed the entire length of the therapy room while Clara walked backward in front of her, hands hovering, ready to catch, and Marcus and Rachel stood behind the glass, holding each other so tightly, neither one could tell whose heartbeat they were feeling. Each step was a war. Ellie's muscles shook. Her knees buckled and caught and buckled again. She sweated through her hospital gown, and her face turned red with effort. And twice she grabbed Clara's arms and hung there, gasping, legs trembling, jaw clenched, refusing to sit down. "I'm not done," she said both times. "I'm not done yet." Clara held her. "Nobody said you were." By the 4th day, Ellie didn't need Clara's hands. She needed her presence. The sound of her voice, the steadiness of her breathing, the quiet, "good," that Clara said after every step, like a metronome keeping time for a body that was learning its own rhythm for the first time. But her hands stayed at her sides. Ellie walked alone. Rachel called her mother that night. She couldn't get through the first sentence. Her mother thought someone had died. "Rachel, what happened? Rachel, talk to me." "She's walking, Mom. Ellie is walking." The silence on the other end lasted so long, Rachel thought the call had dropped. Then she heard her mother, a woman who had raised 4 children and buried a husband and never once let anyone see her cry, weeping so hard she had to put the phone down. Word spread the way it always does in military communities, fast, distorted, and impossible to contain. By the 5th day, the hospital commander had been briefed. By the 6th day, calls were coming from the Pentagon. Not about Ellie, about Clara, about the technique, about where it came from and who owned it, and whether it could be replicated and scaled and turned into something with an acronym and a budget line. Dr. Pratt handled the first wave. She sat in conference calls and said the same thing over and over. The patient is a child. The priority is her recovery. Everything else waits. But on the seventh day, the men in suits arrived. 2 of them. No badges, no introductions. Military-adjacent posture. The kind of men who appear after outcomes, not before, and whose questions are never really questions. They found Clara in the cafeteria at 18:30, eating alone, still in her scrubs. One of them sat across from her. The other stood. "Nurse Whitfield," the seated one said, "you learned this technique overseas." Clara set down her fork. "That's not a question." "No, it isn't." He folded his hands. "We know about KwaZulu-Natal. We know about the JSOC adjacent operations. We know about the rehabilitation program for compromised assets." He paused. "We also know that program was never officially sanctioned and that the techniques developed within it were never cleared for civilian application." Clara's jaw tightened. "Those techniques saved people." "They were developed on people," the man said. "People in custody, people who didn't volunteer. I wasn't part of that phase. But you benefited from it. You learned from practitioners who were." Clara stared at him. "What do you want?" "Cooperation. We want the technique documented, formalized, submitted for review under a controlled framework." "And if I refuse?" The standing man spoke for the first time. "Then we revisit the classification status of your overseas service, which would make your current nursing license problematic." Clara felt the cold spread through her chest. Not surprise, recognition. She had always known this moment would come. The moment when the thing she had learned in the dark was dragged into the light, and the people who controlled the light decided what it was worth. "You're threatening me," she said. "We're offering you a choice." "Those aren't the same thing." The seated man leaned back. 24 hours, Nurse Whitfield. Think about it." They left. Clara sat alone with her cold food and her racing heart and thought about Ellie Cole taking 3 steps, 5 steps, 10 steps across a therapy room, and she knew, with the bone-deep certainty of someone who had spent years choosing between systems and people, that she would burn every credential she had before she let them turn Ellie's miracle into a program. She told Marcus that night. All of it. Not in Ellie's room, but in the hallway outside it, voices low, the fluorescent lights humming above them like witnesses. "They want to own it," Clara said. "They want protocols, training manuals, replicable methods, something they can stamp and distribute and control." Marcus's face was stone. "And if you say no, they pull my clearance history. My nursing license goes under review. I'm out." Out of Walter Reed? Out of medicine. Marcus was quiet for 10 seconds. Clara counted them. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "What I've always done. The right thing and the stupid thing. They tend to be the same." Marcus almost smiled. "I know that math." "Captain, I need you to understand something. What I did for Ellie, it works because it's human. It requires seeing the person, feeling their fear, matching their rhythm. The moment you turn it into a checklist, it dies. The moment it becomes a program with oversight and metrics and standardized outcomes, it stops being the thing that woke your daughter up." "Then what do you need from me?" Clara looked at him. "Protection. Not for me, for the technique, for the idea that some things can't be owned." Marcus Cole straightened. Not the way a father straightens, the way a commander does when he's about to commit resources to a position he intends to hold. "I'll make calls," he said. "People who outrank the suits. People who understand that not everything valuable fits in a classified folder. It might not be enough. It doesn't have to be enough. It has to be loud enough to buy time." Clara nodded. Then she looked through the door at Ellie, who was asleep, peaceful, her legs stretched out on the bed in a position that would have been impossible 2 weeks ago. "She's going to walk out of this hospital," Clara said. "I know. On her own feet." "I know. And when she does, I probably won't be here." Marcus turned to her. "What are you talking about?" "The suits don't bluff, Captain. Win or lose, they'll make this difficult for me. Transfers, reviews, investigations. It's how the machine works. It doesn't have to beat you. It just has to slow you down until you stop being inconvenient. Then we fight. You fight. For Ellie. That's your mission. Mine is making sure the next Ellie, the one in some other hospital, in some other wheelchair, with some other file that says permanent, has a chance too. I can't do that from inside a system that wants to own what I know." Marcus stared at her. "You're leaving." "Not today. Not until she's ready." "Clara, Captain," her voice was firm, "I've been leaving places my whole life. I'm good at it. What I'm not good at is staying somewhere and watching the thing I built get hollowed out by people who didn't build it." Marcus pressed his hand against the wall, the same gesture he made when he was absorbing something he couldn't change. "She's going to miss you." "I know. Rachel's going to be furious." "I know that too." "And He stopped. His throat worked. "You gave me back something I thought was gone forever." "She was never gone," Clara said. "She was waiting. You just needed someone stubborn enough to listen." 2 more weeks passed. Ellie graduated from steps to strides, from strides to laps around the therapy room, from laps to walking the 4th-floor hallway with a physical therapist on one side and Clara on the other, her parents trailing behind, Rachel filming on her phone with tears streaming down her face. Ellie fell 7 times. Each time, Clara caught her, or Marcus caught her, or she caught herself, and each time she got back up with the same fierce expression. Her father's expression, the look of someone who has been told they can't and has decided that can't is just a word that hasn't met her yet. Dr. Briggs watched from a distance. He didn't interfere. He didn't comment. He did something harder. He observed. He took notes. He read Clara's methods with the humility of a man who was rebuilding his understanding of his own profession from the ground up. On the 10th day, he approached Clara in the hallway. "I've been studying what you do," he said. Clara waited. "It's not mystical. It's not alternative. It's neuroscience we haven't named yet." "That's the most honest thing you've ever said to me," Clara replied. Briggs nodded slowly. "I'm not going to resign." "You shouldn't. I'm going to stay and learn, because if you're right about suppression, then there are other patients in this hospital, maybe hundreds, whose files say permanent and shouldn't." Clara looked at him, really looked at him, the way she had looked at Ellie that first day in room 412. Not with judgment, with recognition. "Then learn, Dr. Briggs, but learn from the patients, not from the scans." He held her gaze. "I owe you more than an apology." "You don't owe me anything. You owe it to the next kid you examine. Ask them what they feel before you tell them what they can't do." He nodded once and walked away. Clara watched him go and thought about how strange it was that the people who fight you hardest are sometimes the ones most capable of changing, because their resistance isn't apathy, it's investment. They care about being right because they care about the work. And when the work changes, they change with it. Clara's last day at Walter Reed was a Thursday. She didn't tell Ellie until that morning. She knelt in front of her wheelchair, the wheelchair Ellie barely used anymore, the wheelchair that had become more habit than necessity, and took both of Ellie's hands. "I have to go," Clara said. Ellie's face crumbled. "No, I have to." "But I'm not done yet. I'm not all the way." "Ellie," Clara squeezed her hands, "you've been all the way since the moment you told that room full of doctors that your legs were asleep but not gone. Everything after that was just your body catching up to what you already knew." Tears rolled down Ellie's cheeks. "Where are you going?" "Somewhere I'm needed." "I need you." "You needed someone to ask the first question. I asked it. Now you have the answer. You don't need me for what comes next. What comes next? Clara smiled. Everything. Marcus and Rachel were in the hallway. Rachel was trying not to cry and failing. Marcus stood with his shoulders back and his jaw locked, the posture of a man at a funeral for someone who isn't dead, the formal bearing of respect for something ending. Clara stepped out and faced them. I don't know how to thank you, Rachel said, her voice breaking. You already have. Every time you showed up, every time you drove here and walked through that door, even though you were terrified of hearing the same thing again. That's not nothing, Rachel. That's everything. Rachel pulled Clara into an embrace, so tight Clara felt her ribs compress. She held on for a long time. Then she let go and pressed her hands over her mouth and turned away because the next sound coming out of her was going to be the kind of grief that empties a room. Marcus stepped forward. He and Clara stood face to face. Two people from different worlds who had been fused together by a child's courage and a question no one thought to ask. If you ever need anything, Marcus said, anything, you call me. I will. I mean it, anything. Clara met his eyes. Take care of her, Captain. That's all I've ever tried to do. No, Clara said gently. Before you were trying to protect her. Now protect her future. They're different. Marcus nodded. Then he did what he had done once before, and what Clara knew he would do again. He saluted her. Slow, sincere. The salute of one warrior to another. Clara returned it. Then she turned and walked down the hallway with her bag over her shoulder and her badge still clipped to her scrubs, and her hands, those hands that had woken a sleeping body and broken open a family's grief and challenged an institution's certainty, folded at her sides. She didn't look back. She had learned a long time ago that looking back makes leaving harder, and leaving was the part of the job she would never get used to. 3 months later, Ellie Cole walked onto a school stage. Not wheeled, not carried, not assisted. She walked, steady, deliberate, head high, wearing the dress Rachel had bought her the day after the wheelchair went into storage. The dress Ellie had chosen herself because it was the first time in her life she had needed to think about what her legs would look like when people could actually see them. The auditorium was full. Teachers, parents, classmates who had only ever known her in a chair. Marcus sat in the front row in his dress uniform. Rachel sat beside him, gripping his hand so hard her knuckles were white. Ellie's grandmother sat on Rachel's other side, tissues already wadded in both fists. Ellie reached the center of the stage. She stood there, just stood, not speaking yet, just letting the room see her, upright, unassisted, present in her body in a way that every medical record in existence had said would never happen. Then she said, "My name is Ellie Cole, and I'd like to tell you about the day someone asked me a question." Marcus broke. Rachel broke. The grandmother broke. Half the auditorium broke. Ellie smiled. And somewhere far away, in a clinic with no name, in a town with no map, Clara Whitfield watched the live stream on a cracked phone screen, wearing scrubs that said the name of a hospital no one had heard of, sitting on a metal chair with her back against the wall and her hands folded in her lap. She watched Ellie speak. She watched Ellie gesture with her hands. She watched Ellie shift her weight from one foot to the other, casually, unconsciously, the way people do when they've always been able to stand. Clara smiled through the tears she didn't bother wiping. Then she closed the phone, stood up, and walked into the next room where the next child was waiting. The next body that the world had given up on. The next file that said permanent. She knelt. She placed her hands gently on the child's ankles. She looked into eyes that no one had looked into, really looked into, in a very long time. "Hi," Clara said softly. "Tell me what you feel. Because some people are not meant to stay. They are meant to arrive exactly when the world has stopped believing, ask the one question no one thought to ask, and leave before anyone can put their name on a wall or their method in a manual. They are the ones who kneel when everyone else is standing, who listen when everyone else is diagnosing, who touch a child's ankle and hear a symphony that 18 machines missed. They do not need credit. They do not need titles. They do not need anyone to remember their names. They just need the next room, the next child, the next body that is not broken, but waiting. And that is enough. That has always been enough.